Morning broke gently over the rolling hills of Connecticut, where the Prescott Mansion stood like a sleeping giant cloaked in ivy and silence. The dawn mist still lingered in the garden, glistening on the marble statues that lined the path. Birds fluttered near the fountain, and the faint hum of the world awakening could be heard in the distance. Inside the mansion, Amelia Brooks moved quietly, her hands wrapped around a porcelain vase of freshly cut roses. The scent filled the air, warm, delicate, and fleeting. She placed them carefully on the oak table by the grand staircase, just as the sunlight slipped through the high windows and painted the hall with gold. To any outsider, this was paradise. To Amelia, it was a cage made of beauty. She was 26, quiet, graceful, the kind of woman people often overlooked. After her parents' death, she'd taken the first job she could find, scrubbing marble floors and dusting chandeliers for people who never learned her name. But here at Prescott Mansion, things were different. Her name was known, not by everyone, but by him, Alexander Prescott. He was the kind of man you read about in magazines, tall, sharp-featured, and perpetually untouchable. The heir to a fortune built from real estate and steel, yet burdened by grief since his father's passing. People said he had everything, wealth, power, influence, but no heart left to give. Yet Amelia had seen something else. There were nights when she would pass the music room and hear the piano playing. Not elegant, rehearsed notes, but raw, aching melodies that spoke of something broken. Once she paused outside, hidden in the hallway's dim light, and listened as he played a lullaby. It was simple, fragile, the kind of tune that felt like a memory. That night she cried quietly, not knowing why. The next morning, when she entered the living room, she found him there, standing by the window, his gaze distant. "Do you always wake before dawn?" he asked, startling her. She turned, clutching the vase tighter. "Yes, sir." "It's quieter then," he smiled faintly. "That's why I play at night." That was the first real conversation they had. From then on, the air between them began to change, subtle, like a shift in light. He began noticing the way she folded napkins perfectly, how she paused to admire the morning sky. Once he left his study door open and asked her to bring coffee inside. As she placed the tray, she noticed a book of poetry open on his desk. "You read Byron?" she asked softly. He raised an eyebrow. "You know Byron?" "Some of us poor people read too, sir," she replied with a shy smile. That was the first time he laughed, a sound low and warm, as if he hadn't used it in years. Days turned into weeks. Their conversations grew longer. Sometimes he'd ask her about her life before the mansion. Other times, he'd share fragments of his own childhood, how he used to sneak into the kitchen to steal cookies, how his mother scolded him for getting dirt on his shoes. Eleanor Prescott, even her name carried frost, a woman of perfect posture and perfect control. She ruled the mansion with elegance and fear. Her eyes missed nothing. Her expectations were law. To her, the Prescott legacy was sacred, and no servant girl would ever touch it. One afternoon, Eleanor's reflection appeared in the mirrored hallway just as Amelia walked by. "You're the new maid from Brookfield, aren't you?" she asked, her tone crisp. "Yes, ma'am." "Your hands, they're too soft for housework. Be sure you're not here for something else." Amelia's breath caught, but she simply lowered her gaze. "No, ma'am. I'm just here to work." That evening, Alexander joined Amelia in the garden. He watched as she trimmed the roses, her hands trembling slightly. "She said something, didn't she?" he asked quietly. Amelia hesitated. "Your mother doesn't like strangers near the house." He looked away. "She doesn't like anyone near me." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to still. There was no master and maid, no distance of class or status. Just two souls standing in the glow of fading sunlight, both trapped by walls they didn't build. But from the upper balcony, Eleanor watched again. Her pearls glimmered against her throat as her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. That night, she called her lawyer. "Find out everything about Amelia Brooks," she said. Everything. And as the wind howled outside the Prescott Mansion, a storm was quietly beginning to form, one that would destroy everything Alexander had ever dared to feel. The following week arrived, wrapped in an uneasy calm, the kind of silence that comes before thunder. Amelia noticed it first in small ways. The other maids stopped talking when she entered the room. The head butler avoided her eyes, and once, while polishing the silverware, she caught the faint sound of a telephone conversation behind a half-closed door. Mrs. Eleanor Prescott's voice, low but sharp as glass. "Yes, I want her records," Eleanor said. "Every detail, family, education, finances. I don't care how far back it goes. There must be something." Amelia's hand froze over the table. She didn't hear the rest, but that one sentence stayed with her like a chill that refused to leave. That evening, Alexander found her by the greenhouse, her sleeves rolled up and fingers covered in soil. The scent of jasmine filled the air, soft and intimate. "You work too hard," he said from behind her. She turned, startled. "I prefer it that way. It keeps me from thinking." He smiled faintly. "And what do you try not to think about?" She hesitated. "About things I can't have." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then quietly he said, "You're not the only one who feels that way." The air grew heavy between them, fragile and warm. The light from the greenhouse lamps drew faint gold lines across their faces, and when he reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, she didn't move. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent, the touch of a man who'd forgotten what tenderness felt like. But just as the moment deepened, a sound echoed across the hall, the click of heels. Amelia stepped back, her heart hammering. Alexander's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "She can't know," he murmured. "I know," Amelia whispered. "She already suspects." That night, Eleanor dined alone in the west drawing room, her reflection floating like a ghost in the glass cabinet behind her. When Alexander entered, she greeted him with her usual smile, graceful, deceptive. "You've been distracted lately," she said, slicing her steak with elegant precision. "I've had work to handle." "Oh, I'm sure you have." "Real estate, meetings, servants." She let the last word linger. "Particularly one." Alexander set his fork down. "Mother, I've always trusted your judgment, darling. But I've also seen men of your bloodline make poor choices when sentiment gets involved." His voice sharpened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," she replied sweetly. "I'm warning you. That girl doesn't belong here. You don't know where she came from." He rose abruptly. "I know enough." "No," Eleanor said, her tone turning cold. "You know what she's shown you, and I intend to know the rest." When he left the room, her expression changed, soft elegance melting into ruthless resolve. She reached for the phone again. "Yes, I'll double your payment." "I need results within 2 days." Amelia couldn't sleep that night. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rumbled far away. She sat by her small attic window, clutching a letter, the last one her mother had written before she died. It reminded her of why she'd come here, of how badly she'd needed this job. Losing it now would mean returning to the world she had escaped, a world of debt, hunger, and shadows. She heard footsteps on the staircase and quickly wiped her eyes. The door opened. "Alexander!" "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, panic flickering across her face. "I don't care," he said softly. "You're crying." "It's nothing." "Don't lie to me, Amelia." Her breath trembled. "Your mother is looking into my past." He stepped closer.
"Then let her."
"Whatever she finds won't change what I feel." "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "She'll destroy me." For a moment neither spoke. Then he took her hands, his voice low but fierce. "Then I'll protect you, whatever it costs." And then, for the first time, he kissed her. It wasn't a careless kiss, nor one born of impulse. It was quiet, full of ache and defiance, a promise whispered between two people who knew the world would never forgive them. But love is never safe in a house full of secrets. The next morning, Eleanor's investigator arrived at the mansion, his coat dripping from the rain. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Everything you asked for, ma'am." She waited until she was alone before opening it. The papers inside were ordinary, until she found the last page, a single photograph, a grave, a name she recognized. A man who had once worked for her husband. Her eyes narrowed. "So that's where she came from," she whispered. She stood slowly, staring toward the window where the garden glowed faintly in the grey morning. "Oh, Alexander," she murmured, "you've fallen for the daughter of a thief." Her fingers curled around the photograph, crumpling it as thunder rolled again outside. Let's see how long her innocence lasts. The morning after the storm, sunlight returned to Prescott Mansion, but its warmth didn't reach the people inside. The house felt colder than usual, as if the rain had washed something away, trust maybe or peace. Amelia carried a tray of tea down the corridor, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't seen Alexander since last night's kiss. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the echo of his touch, tender, yet burdened with danger. Downstairs, Eleanor sat in the drawing room beside the grand piano, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the fire. The maid who served her curtsied and left quickly. No one ever stayed near Eleanor longer than necessary. On the table before her lay the crumpled photograph. She smoothed it carefully, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. When Alexander entered, she didn't rise. "You've been up early," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "Work never ends," he replied, sitting across from her. "Nor do mistakes," she murmured, pouring herself coffee. "Tell me, my dear, have you ever wondered who this girl truly is?" He frowned. "If this is about Amelia, it is," she interrupted, "because she's not what she seems." She slid the photograph across the table. He hesitated, then looked down. A small gravestone, half covered in weeds. The name etched in marble made his chest tighten. Jonathan Brooks, a name he hadn't heard in years, one that belonged to his father's most trusted accountant, who'd vanished amid accusations of embezzlement. Eleanor's voice was smooth as silk. "Your father lost millions because of that man. He betrayed us. And that girl," she paused, her eyes flashing, "is his daughter." Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. He looked up slowly, disbelief warring with pain. "That's not possible." She changed her last name slightly, tried to hide her past. "Clever, but not clever enough." Eleanor's tone hardened. "I warned you." "She's not here to serve tea, Alexander. She's here for revenge." He stood abruptly, knocking over the chair. "You think you can poison every good thing that comes into my life? You can't stand that someone might care for me without your permission." His mother smiled faintly. "I'm protecting you, like I always have." He stormed out, but the words followed him like shadows. By the time he reached his study, doubt had begun to creep in. Meanwhile, Amelia was upstairs, changing the sheets in the guest bedroom. She hummed softly to keep her mind steady, but the melody faltered when she saw Eleanor standing in the doorway. "Good morning, ma'am," Amelia said quickly, lowering her eyes. "Miss Brooks," Eleanor replied, stepping closer. "How long do you intend to stay here?" "As long as Mr. Prescott wishes, ma'am." "And what is it you wish from him?" Amelia froze. I don't understand." Eleanor's lips curved. "Oh, I think you do. I know who your father was." The name sliced through the air like a blade. Amelia's breath caught. Her vision blurred for a second. "My father is dead," she said quietly. "Yes, and he died a thief." Eleanor's words were deliberate, cruel, meant to wound. "Do you think you can erase that by seducing my son? By climbing into this family's good graces?" Amelia's hand shook. "I would never." "You already have." Eleanor stepped closer until their faces were inches apart. "Leave this house before he finds out what you are. If you truly care for him, you'll disappear tonight." Then she turned and left, the sound of her heels echoing down the marble corridor like a countdown. That evening, Alexander found Amelia by the garden again, standing near the fountain where the roses trembled in the night breeze. The sky was painted with streaks of purple and gold, the kind of beauty that feels almost painful. "I've been looking for you all day," he said, approaching slowly. "I've been busy," she whispered, "busy avoiding me." She didn't answer. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Don't," she said softly. He frowned. "What's wrong?" "Your mother knows," she said, her voice breaking. "She knows about us, and about my father." He stiffened. "She told you?" "She told me everything. That my father worked for yours, that he was accused of stealing. I didn't even know until today." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I swear, Alexander, I came here just to work." I didn't know who you were when I took this job." He was silent for a long time. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "And if it's true?" She looked up, hurt flashing in her eyes. "You think I'm lying?" "No," he said quickly, stepping closer. "I don't, but I don't know what to believe anymore." The wind rustled through the trees. For a moment, they stood inches apart, two hearts beating in the space between truth and fear. Finally, Amelia turned away. "She told me to leave." He caught her wrist. "You're not going anywhere. She'll ruin you if I stay. I don't care." But as he pulled her into his arms, he knew it wasn't true. He cared about everything. His name, his company, the legacy that chained him to a mother's expectations. And in that quiet moment beneath the silver light of the moon, love began to feel like a beautiful kind of doom. Later that night, in the dark solitude of her room, Amelia packed her small suitcase. Her tears fell silently as she folded her plain dresses and tucked away the tiny locket her mother had given her. But before she could close the bag, there was a knock on the door. She turned and gasped. Eleanor stood there, dressed in her black silk robe, holding an envelope. "It's for you," she said. "What is it?" "Your payment for leaving. Enough to start a new life somewhere far away. Take it, and you'll never have to scrub another floor again." Amelia stared at the envelope, then looked into the woman's cold eyes. "You think I care about money?" "I think everyone does," Eleanor said quietly. "Especially those who claim they don't." She dropped the envelope on the floor and walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving only the whisper of the night wind through the half-open window. Amelia stood motionless for a long time. Then she sank to her knees, clutching her chest. The mansion around her felt enormous and hollow, filled with beauty that suddenly meant nothing. Somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock struck midnight, and with each toll of the bell, she knew the life she had built. The fragile dream she had dared to believe in was beginning to crumble. The next morning came wrapped in fog. The mansion, usually proud and gleaming, looked ghostly under the pale sky. The birds had not yet begun to sing, and the air itself felt hesitant, as if the house knew something terrible was about to unfold. Amelia hadn't slept. She sat by the window of her small attic room, still in her plain nightdress, the unopened envelope of money lying on the table like an insult. Her eyes were swollen from tears, but her resolve was firm. She would not leave. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she refused to let cruelty decide her fate again. Downstairs, Alexander paced the study, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. A man torn between two worlds. The night before, he'd gone through his father's old files, searching for proof of what his mother had said. The papers were yellowed with age, but the records were there. Jonathan Brooks, his father's accountant, accused of transferring money to an untraceable account and disappearing soon after, but the evidence was thin. Too thin. Alexander remembered his father, a strict man, yes, but also one who forgave easily. The accusation had always seemed convenient. It had happened months before his father's mysterious car accident. Something about it never felt right. He poured himself a glass of water and stared out the window at the fog-draped garden. He could still see her there in his mind, Amelia under the moonlight, her face trembling between fear and love. In the grand dining hall, Eleanor Prescott sat at the head of the long mahogany table. The morning paper lay beside her untouched. She was dressed immaculately in grey silk, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. "Your breakfast is getting cold, Mother," Alexander said as he entered. She glanced up. "You didn't come to dinner last night." "I wasn't hungry. Or perhaps you were otherwise occupied." He ignored the jab and sat opposite her. "I went through Father's files." Her hands froze. "And I found the case report. There was no conviction, no trial, just an accusation. Your accusation." Eleanor's smile tightened. "Are you questioning me?" "I'm questioning the truth." Her voice cooled instantly. "I protected this family when your father couldn't. I made decisions. You were too young to understand, and you've been making them ever since," he said. Bitterly, The silence that followed was thick and sharp. Then she said softly, "If you insist on defying me, you'll regret it." He stood up slowly. "Maybe, but at least I'll know I live for something real." Amelia spent the morning working quietly in the guest rooms, keeping her distance from everyone. She could feel eyes on her, whispers trailing her through the corridors. The mansion staff had begun to sense the tension, though no one dared speak of it. By noon, she was sent to deliver tea to the library. When she entered, Alexander was there, sitting by the window, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. "You asked for tea," she replied softly. "I didn't ask for this distance," he said. Finally meeting her eyes, she hesitated, then placed the tray down. "You read about my father, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "I did. And you believe it?" His silence was the answer she feared. "I don't know what to believe," he said finally, his voice low, broken. "Everything I've learned about my family feels like a lie. But if it's true, she interrupted, tears filling her eyes, "then I'll carry that shame alone. But I won't let your mother use it to destroy me." He rose from his chair and stepped toward her. "You think I'd let her?" "I think she already has," Amelia whispered. He reached out to touch her face, but she turned away. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Just then, the door creaked open, and Eleanor's voice sliced through the room like a blade. How touching! Amelia flinched. Alexander's eyes widened. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "I warned you, Alexander, but it seems you need to learn the hard way." "Mother, stop this," he said, stepping between them. "I've already started," she replied calmly. "I made a few calls this morning. It seems our dear Amelia has a rather colourful past, unpaid debts, forged references, and as of today, she no longer works here." Amelia's breath caught. "You can't—" "I already did. The car will take you to the station within the hour." "Mother!" Alexander's voice thundered through the room. "You're humiliating her." "No," Eleanor said coldly. "I'm saving you." She turned to leave, but Alexander grabbed her wrist. "If she goes, I go." Eleanor's gaze met his, steel against fire. "Then pack your things." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Eleanor walked out, her perfume lingering in the air like the aftertaste of poison. Amelia stood there, pale and trembling. "You can't fight her," she said weakly. "I already am," he whispered. By afternoon, the sky had turned a dull grey, and rain began to fall again, soft at first, then steady. Amelia stood in her small room, her suitcase packed once more. This time, there was no stopping it. The driver knocked on the door. "Miss Brooks, Mrs. Prescott asked me to take you to the station." She nodded silently. As she descended the grand staircase, she paused halfway. The chandelier glittered above her like 1,000 frozen tears. Every memory of the past months flashed before her eyes. The laughter, the music, the quiet glances that had felt like promises. At the bottom of the stairs, Alexander was waiting. His coat was soaked, his hair damp. He looked as if he'd run through the rain to stop her. "You're really leaving?" he asked, his voice breaking. "She's made it impossible to stay." "Then I'll go with you." "You can't," she said softly. "This is your home." "It doesn't feel like one anymore." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his cheek. "If we leave now, she'll follow us forever. You'll lose everything." "I can't let you do that. Amelia, please," she whispered. "Let me go before she destroys you, too." He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. Rain streaked down the tall windows behind them, the sound of it like applause for a tragedy neither could stop. When she finally pulled away, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurts to remember. "Thank you for showing me what love feels like." She turned and walked toward the open doors, her figure dissolving into the grey rain. Alexander stood frozen, watching her disappear down the long gravel path until she was nothing but a shadow swallowed by the storm. Behind him, in the dim hallway, Alexander Prescott watched from the top of the stairs, her face unreadable. To anyone else, she might have looked victorious, but in her eyes deep cold and haunted. There was a flicker of something else, a crack in the armor, a faint, unfamiliar tremor of guilt. 2 months passed, 2 long, hollow months, where every dawn felt like a wound reopening. Prescott Mansion had grown quieter since Amelia's departure. The laughter of servants, the rustle of fresh flowers, even the music from the piano, all had vanished. The house seemed to breathe sorrow. Alexander threw himself into work, meetings, contracts, late-night calls, anything that could fill the space she left behind. But no matter how much he tried to drown it, her absence lived in every room. The garden roses she once tended had withered. The greenhouse smelled of damp soil and regret. Eleanor watched her son carefully. He spoke little to her now, but his eyes told her everything, that he hadn't forgiven her and perhaps never would. Yet she believed she had done the right thing, or so she told herself. But every night when she sat alone in her bedroom, the wind would whistle through the old window panes, and sometimes she'd think she heard a voice, soft, trembling, calling a name that wasn't hers. It was only her imagination, she'd insist. Yet guilt had a way of turning imagination into ghosts, far away. In a modest town outside Boston, Amelia was trying to build a new life. She found work in a small bakery, kneading dough at dawn and serving customers with a quiet smile. The owner, a kind widow named Mrs. Hargrove, had offered her shelter in a room above the shop. It was nothing like Prescott Mansion. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the bed was narrow. But it was peaceful, and more honest than anything she had known in years. Still, there were nights when she couldn't sleep. She'd lie awake listening to the rain on the window, and somewhere in the rhythm she'd hear his voice, that calm, steady tone, saying her name like it meant something. She told herself it was better this way. He had his world. She had hers. The two could never meet without pain. Until one morning a letter arrived. It was delivered by hand. No stamp, no return address, just her name in a handwriting she recognized instantly. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Amelia, there isn't a day that passes. I don't regret what happened. You were right, she's destroyed us both. But I won't let her win. I've found something. Something about your father. Come back if you can. I need you to see it with your own eyes. Alexander, her hands trembled as she read it again and again. Could it be true? Could there still be a chance to clear her father's name, to rewrite the past that had chained her? Mrs. Hargrove noticed her pale face. Bad news, dear? Amelia shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. Maybe. Good. Back at the mansion, Alexander had grown restless. The truth had begun to unfold piece by piece. An old lawyer, his father's confidant, had confessed to something shocking. The missing money had never been stolen by Jonathan Brooks. It had been diverted into a private account created by someone else, Alexander Prescott. She had done it to cover her husband's gambling debts and later blamed Jonathan to preserve the family's name. When Jonathan discovered the truth and threatened to expose her, she had him framed and dismissed. His death soon after had been labeled a suicide. But now Alexander wasn't sure it was. The realization had torn him apart. He felt both fury and disbelief. His entire life, the honor he'd been raised to defend, was built on a lie. He sat at his father's old desk, staring at the documents that proved everything. His hands shook as he held the letter Amelia's father had written before dying, a letter that had never been mailed, found hidden in the archives. I did not steal. I only wanted justice. If this letter ever finds my daughter, tell her I loved her until my last breath. Alexander's eyes blurred. God forgive us, he whispered. When Amelia returned 2 days later, the mansion gates loomed before her like ghosts of the past. The rain had started again, soft and steady, as if the sky remembered. She hesitated at the entrance. Everything felt the same. The towering oaks, the faint scent of roses, the gravel path where he had last held her. Then the door opened, and there he was. For a moment, neither moved. Then Alexander walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. You found something? He nodded and led her inside. The air was thick with silence. In his study, he spread out the documents, bank ledgers, old letters, and one faded photograph. As Amelia read through them, her hands shook, her breath catching with every page. When she reached the letter from her father, she broke down completely. "He died thinking everyone hated him," she cried. "All because of her." Alexander knelt beside her. "Not anymore. I'll make sure the world knows the truth." But before he could say more, a voice came from the doorway, cold, brittle and trembling. "You already have." They both turned. Eleanor stood there, her face pale as marble. In her hand was a small pistol, its silver surface glinting in the firelight. For a long moment no one spoke. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears she had never allowed herself to shed. "You found the letters," she said quietly. "I suppose you think I'm a monster." Alexander stepped forward carefully. "Mother, put it down." She laughed softly, the sound hollow. "I built everything we have. I protected this family. Do you know what your father would have done if the truth came out? He would have destroyed us all. You destroyed us yourself," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "You destroyed her family and mine." Eleanor's hand trembled. "I did what I had to do." Amelia spoke then, her voice gentle but firm. "And what about my father? What did he have to do?" The older woman's eyes flicked to Amelia, full of guilt and defiance. "He threatened me. He was going to expose everything." I was terrified. For the first time she looked fragile, human. The pistol lowered slightly, then clattered from her hand onto the carpet. She sank into a chair, her body shaking. "I never meant for him to die," she whispered. "It was supposed to end with silence." Alexander closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. Amelia stood motionless, watching the woman who had destroyed her life crumble before her. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a confession. When Eleanor finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "You'll never forgive me." "I know." Alexander looked at her. The woman who had raised him, lied to him and loved him in her own twisted way. "Maybe not. But the truth will." He turned to Amelia and took her hand. She didn't resist this time. For the first time in years, the mansion felt alive again, not with pride or wealth, but with something raw and real, the weight of truth, and the fragile hope of redemption. Outside, the storm began to ease. The clouds parted just enough for a single ray of light to fall through the window, glinting across the wet marble floor, like the beginning of forgiveness. The morning after that night was unlike any other in the history of Prescott Mansion. For the first time in years, the house was quiet, not from pride or control, but from exhaustion. Every room, every wall, seemed to sigh under the weight of secrets that had finally come undone. The rain had stopped before dawn, leaving the gardens damp and shining. The roses, once neglected, stood heavy with dew as if weeping for the sins of the living. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and new beginnings, fragile and uncertain. Eleanor Prescott sat in her private parlour, wrapped in a grey shawl. Her once perfect posture had wilted, her hair streaked with the softness of age and guilt. The pistol had been taken away, locked in the study drawer. She hadn't spoken since the night before, not even to her son. The police had been discreet. Alexander had arranged it so her confession would remain sealed. She wouldn't face prison, but she would face something harder: silence, isolation, and the memory of what she had done. When Amelia entered the room, Eleanor looked up slowly. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse, "You should hate me." Amelia set down the tray of tea she had brought, though she was no longer a servant. "I did," she said softly. "But hate doesn't heal anyone." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hide. "He was a good man, your father. Better than I ever let myself admit. I destroyed him out of fear, and fear destroyed you too," Amelia replied gently. For the first time, the two women sat together, no longer enemies, no longer bound by class or deceit, just two souls scarred by the same truth. Later that day, Alexander met Amelia in the garden. The morning sunlight was soft, almost hesitant, as if testing whether the world was ready to begin again. He looked different, tired but free. "She's leaving for the estate in Vermont," he said quietly. "She wants to live alone." "I didn't stop her." Amelia nodded. Maybe she'll find peace there. Maybe we all will. They walked along the path where the roses grew, their footsteps slow, unhurried. For a long while they said nothing. Words seemed too small for what they had lived through. Finally, Alexander stopped and turned toward her. You could stay here, you know. The house is empty without you. Amelia smiled faintly. This house has never belonged to me. It could, he said. If you let it. She looked away toward the fountain, where sunlight shimmered on the water. I don't know if I can live among so many memories. Everything here reminds me of pain. Then let's make new ones, he said. Not as master and maid, just as two people who survived. The sincerity in his voice broke something inside her. She stepped closer, searching his face for the boy he used to be, the one who played piano in the dark, who hid his grief behind quiet smiles. And she found him there, still waiting, still hoping. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. He reached for her hand. Then don't start running now. Weeks passed, and the transformation began quietly. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness started to breathe again. The heavy curtains were pulled back to let in light. The old piano was tuned, and some evenings the sound of music drifted down the halls once more, soft, healing, human. Eleanor wrote letters every week. She never asked forgiveness directly, but her words trembled with remorse. Amelia always replied, never cruelly, never warmly, just honestly. The letters became their fragile bridge, one that neither expected but both needed. In time, rumors began to spread in town that the young Prescott heir had opened a charitable foundation in his father's name to help widows and workers wrongly accused in corporate disputes. Few knew that the idea had been Amelia's. She managed the foundation herself, her hands no longer carrying trays or scrubbing marble, but holding the future steady with quiet purpose. One spring afternoon, months later, the mansion hosted a small gathering. Children from the orphanage, their laughter filling the garden that once knew only grief. Alexander watched Amelia among them, her dress light blue, her smile radiant. He walked up beside her, handing her a cup of lemonade. You've done more for this house than any of us ever did, she laughed softly. No, I just reminded it what kindness feels like. As the children chased butterflies among the roses, he turned to her. You never told me what you want now, truly. She looked up at him, sunlight dancing in her eyes. Peace, she said simply. A home that doesn't have walls made of fear, he nodded. Then let me build it with you. She hesitated for only a moment before answering, You already are. That night, as the sky blushed into twilight, the mansion glowed with candlelight. The piano played again, but this time not in sorrow. The melody was hopeful, alive, the sound of two souls rebuilding something from ruins. Eleanor, far away in Vermont, sat by her window as the wind moved through the birch trees. In her hands, she held a photograph, Alexander and Amelia standing together in the garden, smiling. She traced their faces with trembling fingers and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, her heart felt light enough to pray. Back at the mansion, Amelia and Alexander stood by the fountain where their story had begun. The moon cast a soft silver glow across the water. He slipped his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him. Do you ever think we were cursed? He asked. She smiled. Maybe, but curses only last if you stop believing in love. He looked at her. And the world seemed to still. Somewhere beyond the garden, a nightingale began to sing, a clear, gentle sound rising into the quiet air. And in that moment, under the moon and the memory of rain, two broken hearts finally found what they had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not wealth, but peace that came only after truth. The mansion that once held secrets now held something far rarer, forgiveness, and for the first time, it truly felt like home.